Alabama's death row is in the spotlight again. Three prisoners stand at the edge of history, one set for execution within weeks, another scheduled to face a controversial new method, and a third waiting while the courts decide if he's even mentally fit to die. Before we dive into their stories, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell. Stay updated on every upcoming execution, last meals, and final words as we continue to uncover the chilling reality of capital punishment in America. Jeffrey Todd West, March 27, 1997. Jeffrey Todd West, a man who had once worked at Harold's Chevron convenience store in Atala, Alabama, walked back into a place he knew well. But this time, he wasn't there to earn a paycheck. He wasn't there to grab a snack or greet an old coworker. He was there to rob, and he was armed with a .45 caliber handgun. Inside the store that night was 33-year-old Margaret Parrish Berry. She was working the late shift, doing the quiet, routine tasks of a store clerk. Margaret had no idea she was about to become the target of a brutal and calculated act. West knew where the money was kept. Behind the counter, in a cookie tin, lay about $250, the day's cash. He stole it quickly, but robbery wasn't enough. Witnesses later testified that West had spoken openly about leaving no witnesses. That night, he turned those words into action. While Margaret was lying on the floor behind the counter, West approached her from behind and fired a single shot into the back of her head. The medical examiner would later explain that the wound caused rapid incapacitation and a very rapid death. It was an execution-style killing carried out with cold precision. 2 years later, in 1999, the case went before a jury in Etowah County. The evidence was clear. West had deliberately killed Margaret Berry during the course of a robbery. The jury convicted him of capital murder and, by a vote of 10-2, recommended the death penalty. The presiding judge agreed, describing the crime as deliberate, intentional, and especially heinous. For more than 2 decades, West sat on Alabama's death row. His lawyers filed appeals, challenged evidence, and argued for leniency. But one by one, those appeals were denied. The courts upheld the jury's decision, and the death sentence remained in place. On July 3, 2025, Alabama Governor Kay Ivey signed the order that sealed West's fate. His execution was scheduled to take place at Holman Correctional Facility in Atmore. The method, nitrogen hypoxia, a relatively new and controversial execution process. The date, between midnight on September 25th and 6 a.m. on September 26, 2025. That makes Jeffrey Todd West the next man in Alabama set to die. Unlike many death row cases that drag on with stays and delays, his date is fixed and certain. Unless something changes at the very last moment, the state will carry out the sentence. When the time comes, West will be led into the execution chamber at Holman. Witnesses will gather, the air mask will be fitted, and the nitrogen will begin to flow. Within minutes, his life will end. Nearly 3 decades after Margaret Parrish Berry was murdered on the floor of that Chevron store. This is the reality of capital punishment in Alabama. For Margaret's family, the long wait for justice is nearing its final chapter. For Jeffrey Todd West, the date is set, the hour is approaching, and there is no uncertainty left. Anthony Todd Boyd, July 31st, 1993. In Talladega County, Alabama, Anthony Todd Boyd and 3 accomplices confronted a man named Gregory Hughley. A debt of just $200, a cocaine debt, had sealed Hughley's fate. They kidnapped him. They bound him. They drove him to a remote, rural baseball field. There, gasoline was poured over him. Then they set him on fire. Gregory Hughley's body was discovered the next day, burned beyond recognition, in one of the most brutal murders Alabama had seen in years. The case went to trial. The evidence was overwhelming. The jury found Boyd guilty of capital murder committed during a kidnapping. In 1995, the jury voted 10-2 to recommend the death penalty. The judge agreed. Boyd was sentenced to die and sent to Alabama's death row, where he has remained ever since. Now, more than 30 years later, his time has come. On August 19, 2025, the governor of Alabama signed the execution order. Boyd's execution is scheduled to take place at Holman Correctional Facility between midnight on October 23rd and 6 a.m. on October 24th, 2025. The method, nitrogen hypoxia. This will mark only the 2nd time Alabama has used this experimental execution process. In 2018, when given the option, Boyd chose nitrogen as his preferred method of death. At the time, it wasn't even operational. But now, that choice has come full circle. As the date approaches, his lawyers are fighting to stop it. They argue that nitrogen hypoxia is cruel and unusual, that it causes visible suffering, convulsions, and panic. They claim it violates the Constitution and have asked courts to consider alternatives such as a firing squad or even hanging. A federal hearing has been set to weigh these arguments. The state, however, maintains that the method is humane and quick. They insist that any movements seen during past executions are involuntary reflexes, not conscious suffering. With Boyd's case, the debate has grown louder, drawing national and international attention. For Boyd, the countdown is real. In less than 2 months, unless the courts intervene, he will be strapped into the chair at Homan, a mask fitted tightly over his face, and nitrogen gas will replace the air he breathes. Within minutes, his life will end. His crime was shocking. His punishment has been delayed for decades, and now his execution has become a test case in America's ongoing struggle with the death penalty. Anthony Todd Boyd is not just another name on Alabama's death row. He is the center of a fierce legal and moral battle, one that will play out under the world's watch this October. David Lee Roberts, April 22, 1992. David Lee Roberts was a house guest at the home of his girlfriend's boyfriend in Marion County, Alabama. That afternoon, Roberts packed his belongings, stole money, and walked away. But he didn't go far. Quietly, he returned to the house later. Inside, Anetra Jones lay asleep on the couch. Roberts raised a .22 caliber rifle and fired 3 shots directly into her head. Then he poured a flammable liquid over her body and the floor, setting the place ablaze to hide the crime. The jury found Roberts guilty of capital murder. By a 7-5 recommendation, they urged a sentence of life without parole. A judge overrode that recommendation and sentenced him to death. Though judicial override would later be prohibited in Alabama, at the time it was still in effect. Roberts landed on death row and has remained there ever since, decades past. Appeals were filed and denied. All legal routes seemed exhausted. Then, in mid-2025, an execution date was finally scheduled. The governor signed a warrant. Roberts was to be executed on August 21, 2025, at Homan Correctional Facility using nitrogen hypoxia, the same experimental method chosen by other inmates. But then came a startling twist. In July 2025, Marion County Circuit Judge Talmage Lee Carter issued a temporary stay. He ordered that Roberts undergo a mental competency evaluation. The key question: does Roberts rationally understand what's happening? Does he comprehend that execution is his punishment, and why? Roberts' attorneys say he suffers from severe paranoid schizophrenia. Diagnoses include hallucinations and delusions. In February 2025, a prison psychologist noted Roberts was hearing voices, behaving illogically, and responding delusionally. In one disturbing incident, he attempted to burn tattoos from his arm and leg because he believed they were trying to control his thoughts. Mental health professionals, including a psychologist from a major university, have confirmed his condition. They say he may not understand why he's on death row or why the state seeks to execute him. Because the evaluation report wasn't completed in time, the Department of Corrections halted all execution preparations. The August 21st date passed without incident, so far. Now Roberts remains in limbo as he undergoes psychological testing. No new date has been set. Advocates and legal experts brace for the implications. Should a state execute a man who may not fully grasp his punishment? If Roberts does not have a rational understanding of his fate, executing him may violate constitutional protections against cruel and unusual punishment. This case forces a broader reckoning. Can and should the justice system carry out death sentences on those who cannot fully understand why they are being executed? These 3 names, West, Boyd, and Roberts, tell us a lot about the state of executions in Alabama today. One man is set to die in just weeks. Another may face a brand new execution method that has the world watching, and a third waits in limbo while judges decide if he even understands his fate. What do you think about Alabama's use of the death penalty, especially the nitrogen gas method? Drop your thoughts in the comments. And don't forget to like this video, subscribe, and share it so more people can join the conversation about justice, punishment, and humanity.